Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the post 121, writing a first page. Brilliant. This post comes via request from the legendary Danny. Hi Danny. Danny wants us all to think about the nature of writing the first page of an article or a book chapter or a book. And he asked me if I could help him work through some of the more uneven literature that emerges in fiction about how to write a first page in fiction and its relevance to us working in academic life. Now this is a brilliant request. And I am terribly interested in how what exists in other genres of writing we can use in academia, but further, how our practices and protocols in academic life might actually assist other genres of writing and dissemination as well. But also there are these fascinating, quirky genres like memoir, like creative non-fiction that operate between fiction and non-fiction and can be enhanced by us doing the hybrid type of work that we're doing today. Now, like many of you, I'm doing a lot of work on first pages at the moment. I've got a big year in front of me, you have as well. And so thinking about the nature of first pages is really a productive moment, I think, for us as we're planning our future 12 months and our writing. And for academics, and this is just an argument for you to consider, I think for academics, abstracts get in our way to stop us thinking more actively and productively and intriguingly about the nature of the first page. So we work hard on the abstract, and abstracts are really, really hard to do. And so we sort of work hard on the abstract and then we're exhausted. Then we go, yeah, I'm done. And so the first page of academic writing tends to be a bit instrumental, a bit dull, and a bit predictable. So I'm asking today, let's use the literature, and let's talk about the literature, which we'll do in a second. Let's use the literature about the writing of the first page to improve the work that we do. And I need to also talk about the change, the radical change in publishing at the moment, and the re-intermediations that are also occurring. Let me explain what I mean. Now, you know we've talked about a lot. The great gift of digitization is disintermediation. What that means is links are removed in the supply chain between producers and consumers. Well, what does that mean? That means we as academics, we can work much more directly with the people who read our work. So we haven't got all these re-intermediatory functions that stop us from connecting our research with the people who might gain from it. So this means that we can write now and we can find an audience without all these intermediaries getting in the way. So all sorts of new services post-digitization are available to us all of us who write, all of us who exist in the world. And so the power of gatekeepers is declining, and radically. So I've been fascinated, this was what Danny picked up, that the quality of these guides about how to write and how to write a first page, the guides are very uneven and some of them are really a bit wrong. And what's happened now is these guides about how to write a first page, how to write, your first book and so forth, these books are now being dominated by these re-intermediary agents. So that means like literary agents, former publishers. And what they're doing is they're constructing these hard and fast rules about this is what good writing is and this is what is not good writing. Now, in the old days, agents, so literary agents, were important for certain groups of writers. Can I say agents have never been important to academics? We deal with our publishers directly, and people often forget when they're going, oh, I need an agent, you can't get on without an agent. Well, academics have been writing books and selling thousands, tens of thousands of books without agents for well over a century, right? So we need to remember we're an interesting archetype of disintermediation. But so we contact publishers directly and always have. But for the rest of the writing community, things are changing. So we've got these new disintermediation, re-intermediation agents taking us away from these gatekeepers of publishing and agents. And just to give you a couple of examples of these services, Hi Doug, good on you Doug, we're proud of you. Draft to Digital, but also Ingram Spark. Just two examples of free services that are available for all writers to connect us directly with our audiences. So the need to beg agents, literary agents, the need to beg publishers, that's now over. That's now gone. And as all the recent literary awards are showing, agents and publishers are getting it wrong. And there's no other way to pretty this up. They go, oh, I'm terribly important. I know what I'm doing. I'm a great gatekeeper of quality. Well, you would be wrong, because self-published books that are increasingly called indie or independent publishing, these books are starting to win awards. And lots of them. Now, why this is such a disruptive presence in publishing is it shows that the agents and the publishers are getting it wrong. So self-published books in the old days, even 5 years ago, self-published books were called vanity publishing. Why vanity publishing? Well, particular publishers were paid by authors to publish their work. So that was vanity publishing. But of course, that model's now gone. The payment has gone with these free disintermediation services. So do we describe a musician who releases their music on iTunes through Apple? Do we describe them as vanity musicians? No, they've always been independent museums. So why don't we do the same thing with writers? Great question. And I think the answer is summoning Goffman's stigma. I think we need the stigma around vanity publishing. Well, we don't, but the stigma around vanity publishing is required because agents and publishers need to try and convince the rest of us that they're still needed, that they're still important, whereas all the evidence actually shows we're now in a post-agent, post-corporate publishing environment. The world has actually changed. But we need to sort of have that stigma around vanity publishing to show that there's no wizard behind the curtain. Okay, so just as we refer to indie music, I'm very comfortable now that we refer to indie or independent publishing. And remember, I'm saying this as someone who has worked with corporate commercial publishing for 25 years. I've sold thousands upon thousands of books, and I have a fair knowledge of corporate publishing. So at the very point that agency and autonomy is returning to writers, the agents are magically reappearing and writing books to show, right, well, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do to be a successful writer. So this is the material that Danny's found. And quite rightly, he's going, is this stuff right? And Danny's right. Mostly it's not. But what's interesting is that the agents now are reinfusing their roles by self-published authors who have done the work already. They're independently published. They've sold tens of thousands of books. They're in the New York Times bestseller list. And at that point, the agents contact them and go, oh, look, I can be of assistance to you, right? Well, after someone's been successful, you're just jumping on the bandwagon. You haven't discovered them, right? So sort yourself out. So when I was doing this work for Danny, I, like him, was absolutely stunned at the misplaced confidence of these agents, former agents, editors, former editors, who are so definitive in configuring rules for writing when the best writers, time and time again, have broken all these rules. And as Noah Lukeman, in his wonderful book for Oxford University Press, stated, quote, most people are against books on writing on principle. So am I. It is ridiculous to set down rules when it comes to art. Most of the truly great artists have broken all the rules, and this is precisely what makes them great. End of quote. Now, this is an honest and really important statement, and I think we come from this premise. We take this premise as true, and we take that argument for a walk. Because whenever I was reading all these bizarre books for the Post, with these agents and publishers listing the rules that are required for a good first page, I could think of 30, 40, 50 outstanding writers who broke that rule. Okay, so if the rules are broken by great writers, are they actually rules in the first place? Question mark. Therefore, whenever we see writing rules being constructed, we have to remember now that that is the way in which editors and agents are attempting to remind us all that they're important. Whereas actually, of course, the world has changed, publishing has changed, capitalism has changed, the way in which writers write and readers read is altering. So just to give you one example of these agents and former agents who are reinforcing how incredibly important they are, not, Mary Cole in 2025, let me just say 2025, stated, quote, "You must first impress a series of gatekeepers before you get access to the reader's time, emotional investment, and of course, media dollar." End of quote. That statement is empirically incorrect. Remember, we're not discussing academic peer review here. I'm still a big believer, as you know, in peer review, because peer review is assessing the intellectual content, the academic standards, right? That's about content. What we've got with these sorts of books is a bunch of people using subjectivity to say, oh, this is, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. So imposing these subjective rules about what is good and bad writing. Now, we're not talking about grammar. We're not talking about the structures of language here. We're talking about subjective views about what is good writing. And while the sort of errors that we're seeing with these new re-intermediators at the moment are clearly wrong, remember there's a history here, team. Publishing is a weird beast, okay? And let me just give you some historic examples, really before digitisation. So the remarkable book Steps by Jerry Corsini won the National Book Award in 1969. Now, 6 years later, a freelance writer, naughty man, Chuck Ross, retyped, remember this was the 70s, retyped the first 20 pages of this award-winning novel. And he sent it to 4 publishers and used the author's name, Eric Demos. Right, so you see what he's done. Now, all 4 publishers rejected that manuscript. Remember, this is an award-winning book. They got 20 pages of it. They A, didn't recognise it, and B, didn't recognise that it was actually outstanding and quality and a transformative piece of literature. So 2 years later, Ross then had retyped the entire manuscript and then sent it as Eric Demos once more, and sent it to a series of agents and publishers, including the original publisher, Random House. And all of the publishers and agents rejected it, mostly without any comments at all. And Random House, the original publisher, sent just a form letter going, yeah, nah, bye. So 14 publishers and 13 literary agents didn't recognise this book that had already been published, already won a series of awards, and they didn't recognise the quality of it. Okay, then we get to John Kennedy Toole, famous example, wrote that fantastic comedic novel about New Orleans, A Confederacy of Dunces. What a great book this is. Now, this was rejected by publisher after publisher after publisher, and the author tragically killed himself in 1969. But his mother refused to give up on this book, and it was just endlessly being rejected by publishers and agents. But then, of course, she got patronage from Walker Percy, and this book was published by Louisiana State University Press, and it went on in 1980 to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So, you see what I'm arguing here? Always remember, when you read any guide about writing, how to write a first page, how to write a book, think about who is trying to intensify their power, the power that they hold when they're making these sort of rules and mandates and judgment. Who gains from those rules and who loses from those rules. So therefore, as we start to prepare for the next stage of our writing life, all of us, let's watch the gatekeepers. Let's be clear who they are and their role in our lives. And look, there's a great conference that's happening in Portugal next year with the title DIY Cultures for Global Uncertainty. Now, for me, that's probably the project for all of us in the next few years. DIY Cultures for Global Uncertainty. It gives us that project. So Danny, now that we've done all that preamble about why all those books were so weird and you were going, what are these people actually doing? Let's now get into what I think are some mantras and ideas, not rules, some ideas that we all can gain from in academic life when we engage with and explore the ideas from fiction writers and fiction genres. So let's do this. The first page. Writing the first page. And the first of my four, and by the way, the four are orientation, language, structure, and then finally pacing, movement, and agency. So they're my four mantras. Let's start with the first, orientation. Now, first pages really have one role, and that is to orient the reader into your world, into your worldview. And this is what Mary Cole described as, quote, making readers care, end of quote. What we're trying to do in an academic article, let alone a book, but in an academic article, is we are trying to build a world for our readers. Who are the important scholars here? What are the important disciplines that we are consulting? Why does this topic matter? Why should we care about this topic? What's the mattering map of this topic? So let's not anymore be pedestrian about the presentation of our topic. Let's be active. Let's be involved. Let's realise that this first page is constructing a worldview for our readers. We can be sort of tour guides through the research. And here's another mountain. And let's just do this. We can be that sort of tour guide, or we can get excited. We can explain what people look at this, unbelievable, this is amazing. So we can actually get excited, get infused with energy, put energy into our prose to orient our reader into the worldview and explain. Don't just think you're sharing it. Explain why it matters. So we use, I think, a technique from a lot of literary studies, which is foreshadowing. So you are foreshadowing the magnificence of what is to come, but also highlighting the contradictions and the paradoxes, the drama that exists in your field. Let's go to number 2. Let's go to language. There are hundreds, nay, thousands of guides for writing fiction, non-fiction, and there are hundreds of guides for writing a first page. I've read a lot of them. My brain's coming out of my ear, but there's a lot of guides. And there are some intriguing comments about writing and language choices there. And I think there's some helpful work for academics, particularly with regard to word choice. Now, I think academics have a tendency to overuse adjectives and adverbs. And the advice is shared in almost all of the advice books to start to cut the adjectives and the adverbs away. And you've heard me often say the best academic writing shortens our sentences. Academics tend to have long sentences. Let's make a decision to shorten our sentences. One idea, one sentence. One idea, one sentence. Whenever you think of using a colon or a semicolon, don't. By reducing the adjectives in particular in our writing, it means, yes, our sentences shorten, but we also create space for our reader to enliven our views, right? We as academics present facts and interpretation. That's incredibly important. That's what we do, and I'm not shunning that. But it is important that we also remember we are writing to be read. So when we configure that intricate dance of fact and interpretation, we are offering that for a reader to then interpret it and apply it in their own lives. So April de Villa argued that 3 C's organise our language choice: clarity, concision, and coherence. I love a bit of concision. So the first C is clarity, the understandability of your writing. Now, an overcrowded sentence will confuse a reader. So when we focus on clarity in our writing, we reduce ambiguity. Concision, there's that word again. Concision refers to the shortness and the simplicity in your writing. Now, I know simplicity seems an antithetical word in academic life, but it's not. Remember, short and simple does not mean casual and underdeveloped. Instead, when we construct our sentences, let's all make a decision. When we construct sentences, let's not endlessly think about ourselves, me, 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 me. When we write, let's actively think about our readers. The final C, therefore, is coherence. This is about logic, precision, and consistency in our writing. Now, often this is the basic stuff, right? So this is getting your tense right, making sure singular, plural, everything matches. Now, the reason we all focus so strongly on spelling, grammar, and punctuation is so that readers don't notice it, right? This is so important, team. So we can go, oh, this is all very boring. I want to be creative. I want to overshare. You've got to get the fundamentals right. You've got to get spelling, grammar, and punctuation right. Because if a reader finds a spelling mistake, they focus on the spelling mistake and don't engage with your content. We are scholars. Our content matters a lot. We need to reduce as many barriers as possible to stop our readers disengaging from our content. So many students get cross at supervisors like me because I'm just obsessive about getting every single error out of your prose, spelling, grammar, over and over again. And you know, it's dull work for me too, trust me. It's not my favourite thing to do in the universe either. But the reason I'm doing that is so that your content can shine, that your readers engage with the content rather than your readers engaging with your errors. So clarity, concision, and coherence add elegance to your prose. And my single tip here, and it's not really a writing tip, but it is an editing tip, and that is read every single one of your sentences, and if you can remove a word from that sentence and it's still grammatically correct, remove that word. The 3 C's, therefore, create a punchy and engaging first page. 3, structure. Now, the great innovation I learnt from the reading this week, the reading about writing this week, is that the start, the first page, embodies the rest. And I learned a great deal about how the first sentence, the first paragraph, and the first page is a metronome. It's a signifier of the rest. Now, if we all review our work and look at our first pages, I mean, it's quite disappointing. I went back and looked at some of my first pages and I went, they're very dull. That is not what I wanted to say to the world. That's not what this article is about. So if we start to realize the first page must signify and activate the rest, that changes how we write that first page. And this matters a lot, but why it really matters is that we now have reader tracking, and the reader tracking is showing that readers make a decision about whether or not they're going to continue reading by the 5th page. So if readers get to the 5th page and go, yeah, nah, they stop. So this means the beginning really matters if you want them to continue and engage with our research. Now, there's a lot of literature on first sentences. I mean, there's whole books where people just list the first sentence, right? And that's okay, but that puts a huge amount of pressure on writers, and a whole series of writers say they just sort of stare at the blank page because they're too frightened to write that first sentence because it matters so much. So therefore, don't worry about that. Configure a placeholder like we always do. So the first sentence, configure a placeholder like, in this article, I will or we will, this article activates, blah, 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 blah. Put in a placeholder. But as your article, as your book chapter, as your book develops, return to that first sentence and make sure there is one provocative, interesting word there. Make sure there's something that wakes up a reader. Now, Pam Stroud described opening sentences as, quote, a passport to the world that you have created, an invitation to the readers to join you on a captivating journey. End of quote. Whenever you think of using the phrase captivating journey, just don't. I don't know what's worse, captivating or journey. And together it's just a mess. Whenever you think of going, I'm on a journey, just don't. I'm on a journey through life. No, you're really not. Sort yourself out. But I think what Stroud has said there that is important is there is value in seeing the first sentence, the first paragraph and the first page as a passport, as an invitation into your work. It is an indicator that a reader is moving into a new environment. The first page sets the expectations for your writing, for your research, for your argument. And I think the lesson that we learned from great fiction writers is we need to put a lot more attention on that first sentence, first paragraph, and first page. Yes, it provides the frame for our writing, but it also provides the threshold for movement and change and engagement. There are benefits in writing from the middle, and I've done this a few times, Tim, so it does work. Is okay, you go, right, well, I'm just not getting this beginning right. Let's go to the middle. So you write your literature review, you locate your research gap, you present your data collection, your data analysis. So you write your meat and potatoes, right? And that's great. And the reason you may want to start in the middle is the first page actually has to do a lot of work, and it has to do it efficiently. If we write the first page first, we don't have a great sense about its role with the rest, right? And what a first page must do is construct a frame, a good, strong, provocative, engaging frame. So if the frame is strong enough, it allows the rest of the paper to resonate. The first page of your research can and often must accomplish a series of things. It does a lot of heavy lifting. The importance of the research, the background of the study, the research gap, or at least the evidence that a research gap exists, the local context, why you're writing it now, some research objectives, the aim of the study. There's a lot that's going on here. And that's a lot of content, and too often, I'm putting myself in this, too often we as academics present that heavy content in a procedural way so that we're not remembering the relationship between form and content and context. But the gift, I think, of thinking actively about those first sentences, first paragraph, first page, is that we start to focus on flow. And I've often said, not only to my students, but to people I help with their writing around the world, that the toughest writing we ever do is when we connect two ideas, right? So we've got this idea here, and we've got this idea here. How do we connect them? Now, there's blood on the dance floor, right? That is hard writing. Here's an idea, here's another one. How do they connect? If you can write that connection, that is the toughest writing you'll ever do, but it's also the best writing that you ever do. You see, what you're doing is you're writing the connection, not assuming the connection. And so we're building this propulsive first page, one sentence at a time, by writing these connections. And speaking of connection, 4. Here it is. Pacing, movement, and urgency. Now, there's lots of lessons that we can all learn from fiction writers, and I've learned a lot this week. I've really enjoyed doing this research. But I was most changed, and I think my writing has been most changed by thinking about pacing, movement, and urgency. In academic writing, we all do it. We tend to write a pretty bland and descriptive first page. And in fact, academic writing tends to be writing at one speed. You know, what are we doing in the article? What? How? Why? Thanks. That's it. Now, actually, if we can borrow some tropes from fiction, and particularly I think thrillers and detective, if you like, particularly, then we start to think about the different way of structuring our ideas. And some of the mantras that I've read this week are theme, premise, promise. Think about a theme, premise, promise, or premise and trajectory. Premise and trajectory. That changes how academic writing exists. Also, we can revise our presentation of information and action. We can alter the diversity of the speed, the pacing of our writing. So if we start to think about our writing as premise and promise, then it not only creates some consistency through our prose, but it starts to engage our readers in a different way. Therefore, a concrete tip for us all, changed my life this week, the concrete tip for us all is let's all look at the clock of our first page. How are we pacing our writing on the first page? Are we doing some pedestrian walking, but then going for a jog, jumping up and down a bit, getting on a skateboard? Are we moving the pacing of our writing? So let's start to monitor the clock and the timing of our academic work. You see, the goal of the first page actually is to give the reader space. We're giving them space to be involved, to be engaged, to be interested. So let's start to make the form of our writing as interesting as the content. I think there is so much for us as academic writers to gain from learning about all these different modes of dissemination. And obviously nitros are the archetype of that, non-traditional research outputs. If you take nitros seriously, then the entirety of academic dissemination transforms, because there are new ways to connect our research with our readers, our listeners, our watchers, and we can find new audiences for our research overall. Now, this innovation is all on us. We are not only responsible for constructing research, we are responsible of getting beyond ourselves and finding readers, finding an audience for our work. And look, the great lesson from journalism is don't bury the lead. Let's focus on the first sentence, the first paragraph, and the first page. Let's make a commitment, all of us together, to do that in the coming 12 months. First sentence, first paragraph, first page. Let's reach out to our readers rather than assume that they're going to be interested in what we have to say. And most importantly, let's remember Noah Lukeman's great statement when the pressure on writing that great first page intensifies, because I'm going to put a lot of pressure on myself and you to get this first page right. But Lukeman stated, quote, "There is no such thing as a great writer, only great rewriters," end of quote. So it is time to value writing, rewriting, and editing. Let's value all writers, and let's learn from all modes of writing. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.